Good to see you again. This is the last walk. The North Cascades look calm from a distance, but parts of that range are so isolated you can hike for miles and miles without passing another trail, cabin, or person. And today, we're looking at why that isolation mattered when a veteran ranger began noticing strange signs along his usual route, and why the people around him first blamed wildlife, fatigue, or too many long hours alone in the trees. It was September 14th, 2016. Isaac Tate spent 16 years working as a backcountry ranger in the North Cascades, 42 years old, the kind of guy who took his job seriously enough that people trusted his read on things without asking twice. Before we get into what happened to him, you need to understand the route Isaac covered, because it explains why he spent so much time out there alone. It ran through a remote backcountry drainage that stayed difficult to access for much of the year because of snow, washouts, and unstable trail sections. Even late in the season, visitor traffic was light and staffing was thin. Isaac walked the same general route often enough that someone or something paying attention could have learned his timing. Worth knowing too, this was not the first time that specific section had produced strange stories. Rangers who worked there years before Isaac had their own accounts, nothing ever logged formally, mostly waved off as bad light or bad nerves at the time. Nobody connected any of it to anything until Isaac's week gave them a reason to go back and actually compare notes. And that raises a fair question. If none of it ever got written down, how many other rangers out there are sitting on the exact same kind of story right now, just waiting for something to finally make it worth saying out loud? On one of his very first patrols that week, before anything strange had even started, Isaac came across a deer carcass just off the main trail. Standard protocol, relocate it further from foot traffic so it does not draw predators toward hikers. He dragged it a good distance into deeper brush, logged it as routine, and moved on without a second thought. The kind of thing he had done dozens of times over 16 years without incident. The first real sign of anything wrong barely registered as one. Out on patrol with his partner that season, a ranger named Naomi Osmond, Isaac spotted a set of tracks that threw him off. Spaced wrong, pressed unevenly into the ground like the weight behind them was not distributed the way it should be. Curious, he followed them a short distance off the main route, and the trail led him to a rock outcropping with a shallow hollow underneath a fallen log. He cleared some blocking brush and deadfall out of habit, the same way he would check any potential den site for hazards, logged it as a minor terrain note, and kept walking. Naomi guessed bear when he mentioned the tracks, and they moved on. That night, back at his truck before heading home, Isaac pulled out his own field guide and actually tried to work the problem himself. Compared stride length, compared weight distribution, tried to match what he had seen against black bear and elk data he already had memorized from years in that terrain. Nothing lined up clean. He told himself it was probably an old or injured animal moving strangely, wrote that down as his working theory, and left it there for the night. Days went by clean after that. No tracks, no signs, nothing worth reporting. Funny how a stretch of normal can do more damage to your judgment than the strange thing itself. Isaac started chalking the whole thing up to nothing much at all. Then the tree line thing happened. Late one afternoon, Isaac locked eyes on something upright near the edge of the trees. Tall, too tall, gone by the time Naomi turned to see it herself. She gave him the bear theory again, reared up on its hind legs, dropped back down. Reasonable enough on its face, except how many bears hold that stance long enough for a grown man to register the height and think, that is wrong, that is too tall for what you're telling me this is? He sat in his truck afterward and recorded himself talking it through out loud, mostly trying to convince himself Naomi was right. He kept that thought to himself the rest of the night. One quiet day passed, which somehow felt worse than the sighting itself. Waiting for something to happen does a different kind of damage than the thing actually happening. That mindset followed him into a conversation with a hiker named Travis Emerson, out working a permit in the section next door. They crossed paths near a trail junction, and Isaac asked him things that came out more pointed than he probably meant them to. Anything strange out there? Anything moving that did not track, right? Travis said no, nothing he had personally noticed. He had heard something moving in the drainage before sunrise, but assumed it was an elk or a bear and never saw it clearly. Isaac wrote that down later in his notebook, along with the approximate place Travis had heard it. By itself, it meant very little. Still, it gave Isaac one more reason to keep looking toward that drainage. Travis walked away from the conversation thinking the ranger seemed a little intense for a routine trail chat, a detail that would not mean anything to him again until investigators asked him directly, much later, to recall every interaction he could remember from that week. That same day, back at their gear cache, tucked roughly 40 yards off the main trail, things had changed. Not torn open the way wildlife tears into food, sorted. A single item, A bag of dried meat had been removed entirely and set apart on a flat rock nearby, deliberately placed rather than dragged or dropped. Naomi crouched beside the cache and checked the disturbed ground around it, but the soil was dry and uneven. There was no print clear enough to identify. No clear track line led toward the cache. No clean trail led away from it either. Just disturbed ground right around the supplies. It still could have been wildlife. Bears can get into almost anything, and animals do not always leave a neat scene behind. But Naomi later said the cache looked less like it had been raided and more like something had handled it, checked it, then lost interest. That's not proof of anything unusual. It was just strange enough that neither of them forgot it. That was the moment Naomi ran out of alternate theories. They logged it together anyway, keeping the wording thin. Unusual activity near cache site. Because what else do you write down when you cannot explain it to yourself first? The report did not say creature. It did not say a threat. It did not even say bear. Just unusual activity near a cache site. A sentence bland enough to disappear among routine trail notes if nothing else had happened. Naomi later said that was exactly why she remembered it. The wording was normal. The way Isaac kept looking back toward the trees was not. That night, Isaac told his friend Zane, the fuller version, admitted Naomi had gone quiet too, which probably made the whole thing feel more real to him than if he had been the only one rattled by it. At home, his wife, a woman named Willow, got the short version over dinner. Something got into the gear, nothing serious. She had no reason not to believe him yet, and at that point, neither did he. Not fully. That is the downside of being good at your job, I guess. When you say a situation is under control, people believe you. Even when you are not completely sure you believe it yourself. Off the back of the cache incident, Isaac requested a trained wildlife detection dog for a few patrols. He had worked with that type of dog during earlier nuisance wildlife calls and knew enough to assist in the field, though the dog normally worked under a handler's direction. He framed the request to his district supervisor, Aldous Grimes, as a way to identify whatever had been getting into their supplies. It was a reasonable request. Aldous approved it. The dog's first outing went completely normal. Calm, working the ground the way trained dogs do. Technically, the dog was meant to work under its handler, not Isaac alone. But with patrols stretched thin that week, nobody made an issue of it. Worth mentioning only because of what came a couple patrols later. Somewhere deep in that same stretch, they heard something moving through brush, maybe 30 yards off, that did not sound like anything ordinary. Slow, deliberate, no snapping underbrush the way something that size should produce. The dog caught the scent first, went rigid, and then locked on completely, barking hard and sustained, the confident kind of alert that means a trained animal has found something real. Naomi and Isaac both froze, neither sure whether to move toward it or pull back. First real corroboration either of them had. Then, whatever it was, closed the distance. The barking cracked apart within seconds. Confidence gone, replaced by something closer to panic. The dog straining backward against its lead hard enough to nearly pull Isaac off balance, refusing to hold its position no matter how firmly he commanded it. What flips a trained animal from certain to terrified in a matter of seconds like that? Naomi later said that was the first moment she stopped treating the situation like a normal wildlife issue. She had seen dogs alert before. She had never seen one go from focused to frightened that quickly. The next morning, Isaac left the dog behind. When Naomi asked why, he told her it had not picked up anything solid and was not worth keeping on the assignment. That was not the full truth. A few days later, Naomi requested a schedule change away from that drainage. She kept the reason practical, saying she had other coverage work to handle, but she never volunteered to return there with Isaac either. Isaac's route notes changed around then too. Earlier entries tracked ordinary things, fallen branches, washed out spots, animal sign, anything that might matter to the next patrol. Later entries got shorter and more repetitive. Time in, time out, weather, which direction he came from, which direction he left. It looked less like routine documentation and more like he wanted a record of where he had been, just in case somebody needed to retrace it. Isaac started running solo from there. She never accused Isaac of making it up. In fact, that was what made the change awkward. She believed something had unsettled the dog and something had disturbed the cache. She just was not prepared to decide it was one unknown thing following one ranger through the forest. Around this same stretch, worn down enough from missed sleep that Willow all but insisted on it, Isaac called in sick one day. A different ranger covered his section that day as part of routine coverage, walked the exact same route, checked the same cache site, passed the same creek crossing. Nothing. No tracks, no disturbed ground, no unusual sound the entire shift, logged as a completely uneventful patrol. When Isaac heard about that clean patrol through Naomi the next day, he made a short note in his notebook comparing the substitute ranger's uneventful route with his own recent patrols. He never explained the entry further. Still, the timing stood out. The strange signs had been reported during Isaac's patrols, then were absent during the substitute ranger's shift. It was that same week, alone at camp for the first time, that whatever this was finally got close enough to make contact of a different kind. That is a rough realization to sit with. A bad animal problem is one thing. Wondering whether it waited for him is something else entirely. Isaac later described hearing slow breathing near the outside of his tent, followed by a brief pressure against the fabric near where he had been lying. He recorded several minutes of audio after it happened. The recording captured wind, his breathing, and a few faint movements outside, but nothing investigators could identify with certainty. What was clear from the call he made the next morning was that he had not slept much at all. Zane later described Isaac as exhausted, speaking in short bursts and stopping every few seconds to listen before he answered. He never said he saw anything outside the tent. He only said he had heard enough to know he was not alone. By morning, he was done trying to explain it away. He called his friend and played part of the recording for him directly, the first time any of it was heard firsthand instead of secondhand. His friend told him plainly, "Come in, take time off, stop going out there alone." That evening, Willow noticed something different the second he walked through the door. Barely touched his coffee that morning, she remembered later, kept glancing at the windows in a way he never used to. Once she pressed him, he ended up telling her more than he probably meant to. First time real fear showed up on her end instead of simple curiosity. The next morning, before heading back out, Isaac sat down with Aldous in person, walked him through the week, straightforward, professional, requested a new partner going forward. Aldous took it seriously enough to log it in writing, but told him nothing could shift until the next rotation. Aldous did not dismiss Isaac, but he also did not have enough to declare an emergency. From his side, there was a disturbed cache, an unsettled dog, a ranger with poor sleep, and one report of contact that no one else had seen, enough to document. Not enough yet to shut down a whole drainage. Isaac went back out regardless. That afternoon, alone on the trail, Isaac later reported being knocked sideways by something moving out of the brush. He never got a clear look at what caused it. Once he got back on his feet, Isaac found his sleeve torn and a scrape along his forearm. He searched the brush where the contact happened, but the ground was too dry and broken up to give him a clear print or a clean trail. His notebook notes mention coarse hair on a branch nearby, though no bagged sample was ever entered into evidence or recovered later. It remains unclear whether he collected anything or simply wrote down what he thought he saw. His official report was much shorter. It mentioned a fall, torn clothing, and uncertain wildlife activity near the trail. That difference matters. The notebook shows what Isaac was trying to work through privately. The report shows what he felt comfortable attaching his name to. What do you even say to your wife that evening that sounds believable? He tried anyway. Brush, rock, an accident. Willow was not buying a word of it. That night, she noticed him checking the lock on the back door twice, something he had never once done in years of marriage, and pushed him harder to stay off that trail entirely. His call to his friend that night sounded nothing like the ones before it. Quieter, measured in a way that told you he was working hard to sound calmer than he actually was. First time he said the word contact out loud instead of just proximity. This is where his notebook becomes relevant, because Isaac had been running two separate records the entire time. His official patrol log stayed dry and restrained, written the way someone writes when they do not want to look unstable on paper. But he also carried a personal field notebook, standard for rangers doing their own tracking work, and that is where the sketches started. First one, right after the tree line sighting, rough, barely more than an outline standing upright. Second, after the tent encounter, steadier line work, a note about the size being bigger than his first guess. Third, done the night of the shove. Shaky hand, but far more detail this time. Shoulder width, arm length, the texture of what brushed against him. Broad shoulders across all three. Long arms. Upright the whole time. No tail in a single drawing. But even those sketches changed depending on when he made them. One showed the figure broader, another showed the arms longer. One had a clearer head shape, then the next one barely had a head at all. They were not a reliable portrait of anything. They were rough drawings from a man trying to hold on to moments that never lasted long enough to see clearly. Next to those sketches sat smaller notes that never made it into any official file. A line about the smell not matching anything from 16 years in that terrain. A note on total silence in its movement. No branch snapping, nothing that size should manage that quietly. The notebook had become a mix of route notes, rough sketches, weather observations, and things Isaac couldn't fit into his official reports. It showed a ranger trying to make sense of a pattern, but it never gave a final answer. Unable to shake what had happened and needing to see it clearly for himself instead of piecing it together from glimpses and sounds, Isaac went back to that same stretch alone one more time, off the books, telling nobody where he was headed. Isaac later told Aldous that something moved behind him off trail, close enough that he heard brush shifting and began moving quickly back toward the main route. He reached his truck with a torn sleeve and dirt on his clothes. Nobody else witnessed the encounter, and the route was not checked until the next day, but the condition of his jacket matched at least part of what he described. That was the night the confession happened. He called Aldous directly, not his friend this time, and told him everything. The lie about the dog, the tent encounter, the shove and the torn sleeve, the chase that had just happened. No more managing what people knew. Aldous had Isaac's formal request for a new partner, the logged cache incident, and now Isaac's account of the torn sleeve and the chase. Aldous met Isaac at the trailhead the next morning with Naomi and another ranger from a neighboring section. They retraced part of the route Isaac described in daylight. Nobody saw a creature. They found disturbed brush near the spot Isaac identified, along with a torn strip of fabric caught low on a broken branch. It matched the jacket he had worn the night before. The ground around it was rocky and dry, so no track line could be followed. Nobody in that group agreed on what the disturbance meant. Naomi leaned toward a bear. The neighboring ranger thought it could have been damaged brush from an earlier patrol. Isaac was the only one insisting the movement behind him had been deliberate. That disagreement followed the case all the way through the search. Aldous suspended solo patrols in that drainage while he arranged for additional staff coverage and a wildlife review. The public route remained open, but rangers were told to avoid the side drainage unless they had a second person with them. Nothing in the reports identified a confirmed dangerous animal. The concern was simply that Isaac had reported repeated unexplained activity, and nobody wanted another person walking in alone. Another ranger was scheduled to return with Isaac the following evening to collect the temporary wildlife detection equipment and recheck the cache route. Hours before they were supposed to leave, that ranger had to cancel because of a family emergency. Aldous had already told Isaac to wait for a partner. Isaac went anyway. According to Zane, Isaac said he only planned to collect the equipment, check the cache one last time, and come straight back out. He took the wildlife detection dog with him, even though the assignment had effectively ended and he was supposed to wait for the dog's handler the next day. The dog had been kenneled at the trailhead staging area, and Isaac had worked with it often enough that nobody realized he had taken it out until he was already gone. Partway into the patrol, the dog locked up, planted its feet, and refused to go another step no matter how Isaac coaxed it. Out of patience, he tied it off right there and kept moving alone. For the first part of the call, Isaac sounded normal. He talked about the route, mentioned the dog stopping near the edge of the drainage, then went quiet in the middle of a sentence. Zane later said Isaac sounded like he had heard someone off trail. Isaac called Naomi's name once. The recording became distorted after that. Zane heard Isaac moving through brush and breathing hard, then the call dropped. He could not confirm whether anyone had actually called to Isaac, whether Isaac had heard an animal, or whether he had only thought he heard someone there. The phone never reconnected. His friend tried calling back immediately. Straight to nothing, no ring, no voicemail pickup, just dead air. He tried again a few minutes later, same result. That was when he called Willow. Willow was still holding a plate of food that never got eaten when the call came in. She listened to what little Zane could actually tell her, and something in the way he described the cutoff told her this was not a dead battery or bad signal. She called Naomi directly. Naomi escalated it straight to Aldous within minutes of hanging up. Search and rescue mobilized off Isaac's last recorded coordinates before the night was over, a team of 6 moving in with headlamps and the notebook markings Isaac had left behind to help narrow down exactly where to start. Searchers found the dog still tethered where Isaac had left it. It was alive, exhausted, and visibly distressed, but uninjured. The dog had not led anyone to Isaac, and it could not be used to establish what happened after he walked away. Its behavior was recorded as unusual, but not conclusive. A working dog can become distressed for plenty of reasons: exhaustion, unfamiliar scent, separation from a handler, wildlife nearby, or simply being left alone in the dark. Searchers could not turn that reaction into an answer. The search stretched across 5 full days over terrain that fought back at every stage. Steep drainages, dense timber, sections where searchers had to move single file with ropes just to cover ground safely. Trained search dogs brought in separately for the operation kept losing the trail at the same creek crossing every single time, no matter how many times handlers reset and tried again from different points along the bank. Running water breaks scent trails, a documented limitation even for experienced search dogs, and that crossing became the one consistent dead end the entire search kept circling back to, day after day. Teams searched both sides of the creek, worked downstream, checked small shelves along the drainage, and looked for places where an injured person might have fallen or tried to shelter. Nothing gave them a clean direction. The creek was not proof that Isaac crossed it. It was simply the last place the available scent and ground signs stopped making sense. After 5 days without further progress, the search was formally scaled back. Sometime afterward, Aldous went back through Isaac's file and found the note from that final confession call, time-stamped just 1 day before Isaac disappeared. Sitting there afterward, that piece of paper reads a lot heavier than it did at the time it was written. The side drainage remained closed during the search and for the rest of that season because of unstable terrain and the ongoing investigation. It reopened later, though solo patrol coverage there was reduced for a time. What investigators eventually pieced together came from several distinct sources, each covering a different part of the timeline. The physical evidence recovered near the creek included partial boot impressions, scuffed ground, and torn brush. The terrain shifted to wet soil, rock, and moving water near the crossing, which made Isaac's route impossible to follow with certainty. Investigators considered the ordinary explanations first: a fall near the creek, an injury after leaving the trail, a wildlife encounter, disorientation after several nights with very little sleep. Every one of them fit part of the case. None of them explained all of it. The phone records covered Isaac's confession and final call. His logs, notebook, Naomi's account of the cache and the dog, Aldis's report, and Travis's trail encounter helped establish the timeline, but none of it explained what happened at the creek. Investigators could not determine what happened to Isaac Tate. He remained officially missing with no confirmed cause, no recovery, and no evidence strong enough to settle on one explanation. For me, it always comes back to that final call. Zane could not confirm what Isaac heard, and the recording never gave investigators a clear answer. But Isaac had spent days reporting the same thing, that something seemed to show up only when he did. Whether he heard a person, an animal, or nothing at all, he moved off that trail believing somebody was there. That was the last decision anyone could account for. No clean ending here, just an open case and a torn sleeve. Catch you next time.